Mayor Castro, in terms of your views of immigration and framing it as a civil right. Is that the way that you see it? And as you're talking to people about immigration and immigration reform, I know that you've appeared before Congress, you've worked closely with President Obama on this particular issue. How do you see it in the context of the 21st century?
Well, I see it in a very similar vein, because if you look at our nation's history, as the governor was saying, what we see are different groups who both were coming to the United States, and then when they lived in the United States were seen as other and treated that way. Of course, folks will remember Benjamin Franklin and his remarks about the Germans ruining the nation and so forth. And you can just go on along the line of folks who were different and who were new. And when we think about what we classically think of the civil rights movement, that's what it was about. It was about people who were seen as different and whether they would be treated equally or not. And so immigrants have had, throughout the generations, in that sense, a similar experience. Right. I also believe that when we think of it or ask, is it a civil right, you can say yes in the sense that it not only impacts folks who are not citizens yet, it impacts folks who are citizens. For instance, there are about 1 million folks in our country who have a spouse who is an undocumented immigrant. And we just talked about the importance of marriage as a fundamental right and being able to be with the person that you want to be with and that you love. And maybe the best example are these dreamers, young people who were brought here through no fault of their own. For all intents and purposes, they are Americans. The United States is what they know. And the question is now, are they going to be able to have the same opportunities and be treated equally? So in that sense, I see it in the same vein as the civil rights movement.
Okay. If we do have 11 to 12 million people who are here, living in the shadows, whatever term that you want to use, if that is one of the major stumbling blocks to something moving forward, right, whether or not there is amnesty, which is strongly, strongly rejected in certain areas, whether or not it is a pay a fine, make some restitution, go to the back of the line, and then sort of start over for those people who are ahead of you. What is the best case individually that you would make to an opponent, somebody who is concerned about immigration, as to how to address that very issue? What do you do? How do we solve this problem, which again I think is one of the two main things that has really made this issue such political dynamite, where people are so unwilling to either talk about it in a thoughtful way or all too happy to demagogue it?
Well, I think you start from the perspective, firstly, that we're dealing with people. And too oftentimes in this debate, we forget about that. We're dealing with people. And these are people who, although they may have not come over to the United States through the legal, usual way, they have built a life here. Right. They often have sons and daughters and spouses who are American citizens. We can craft a law that recognizes that we're dealing with people whose lives have been contributing to the forward progress of the United States, and still also ensure that they have to earn citizenship. Because I do agree, and I think the governor mentioned earlier, in addition to border security, that, and I hear it all the time, that it rubs people the wrong way, that folks would have entered the country illegally and now you're letting them stay here. They say, well, why don't you have them go back to their country and then we'll talk about them becoming citizens one day. I just believe that that's not realistic, it's not practical, and that you can both give them the opportunity but also have them shoulder responsibility for that opportunity to become a citizen.
And anybody thinks we're going to send 11 million people back to where they came from, well, if they tell you that, they'll lie to you about other things. I mean, that ain't going to happen. I mean, that's just simply, that's not going to happen. And it shouldn't happen. The impracticality of sending everybody home should be obvious to everybody.
Mayor Castro, if you could just solve one problem related to this issue, or talk to one person about this issue and have the opportunity to change somebody's mind who maybe disagrees with you, what would it be? If you were able to break through on one aspect of it, what would you most like that to be?
I guess that's a broad question and a narrow question. I would say to look at the history of our nation and to understand that we have had these challenges throughout the history of our nation with peoples that have come from different nations throughout the world. And every single time we've been able to surmount those challenges and to welcome those groups in and to become a stronger nation because of it. And that it's fully in keeping with our tradition as Americans to welcome new immigrants and to find a way to have their brain power and their energy and their talent make America stronger. And that in this 21st century, where, as the governor mentioned, we're competing for investment, for brain power, for economic development on a global basis, we need them as much as they need us.
I don't think there is a single silver bullet, but I can't resist talking about one subject we haven't talked about that I think is really important. Today, it was announced that the United States government is going to quit taking applications for H-1B visas. Mm-hmm. These are the visas for the very specially skilled. We only have 65,000 of them, plus another 20,000 for people with more than a bachelor's degree, a doctorate, or a master's degree. When you have a system that denies these young people, the best and the brightest in the world, to come here, go to school, and then we won't let them stay. So they go home to Mumbai and start a factory that employs 800 people, where if we'd have let them, they'd have gone to Memphis and started a factory that employs 800 people, that they would put, but in Texas, y'all have people think about Texas border and all that. I mean, we're in one of the high-tech centers of the world in this town where we sit. And they need, as the mayor said, they need this talent here. And it's talent we're denying to ourselves. I would urge all of you to just do a little bit of the research about how many jobs are created by the average person that gets an H-1B visa to come to the United States. In a matter of years, it's multiples. There are like 4 or 6 Americans working for every one of those immigrants who came here. And yet our government policy is we don't have enough of these visas to last a whole week in the supply chain.